I'm Taylor Riggs in for Emily Chang, and this is the best of Bloomberg Technology, where we bring you all of our top interviews from this week in tech. Coming up, here's an earful. Silicon Valley is listening to your most intimate moments. We'll discuss the smart speaker craze and how vulnerable users are to their conversations being transcribed. Plus, best in tech. Facebook and Google drop out of the top 10 best places to work list, but DocuSign makes the Glassdoor list. We'll talk to the DocuSign CEO about what makes the company so unique. And automation, transportation. A self-driving semi makes its first cross-country commercial freight run. We'll hear from the company who performed this feat. Now, Silicon Valley is listening to your most intimate moments. It's the focus of a Bloomberg Businessweek in-depth piece on how the smart speaker craze left users vulnerable to their conversations being transcribed. It was one of the most read stories on the terminal on Wednesday. I spoke to 4 Bloomberg journalists on Wednesday about the story, including the devices and use of contractors to transcribe intimate conversations. Let's hear from Bloomberg's Austin Carr in New York, Matt Day in Seattle, Sarah Fryer from San Francisco, and Garrett DeVink in New York.
We spoke to dozens and dozens of transcribers and contractors in this story from everywhere from Ireland to India, and they really had ethical quandaries with this service. They were eavesdropping essentially on a lot of Siri or Alexa customers in order to improve the system's speech recognition capabilities by transcribing our recordings that we submitted to the cloud. The really fascinating thing was that profound disparity that you mentioned. A lot of the contractors felt this was ethically dubious, whereas the Silicon Valley folks, executives, engineers, and so forth that we talked to really didn't think this was such an issue at all, despite years of privacy issues. They saw this as essentially a way of improving quality assurance. One executive at Apple even, who had worked on Siri a few years back, described this as a way of simply fixing voice bugs. But the bigger question is whether or not they disclosed any of this to consumers. Did they have a sense that humans might be listening to the recordings at some point?
Austin, any sense that big tech takes this more seriously going forward?
Well, definitely. We've seen a lot more of the companies issuing new disclosures, new disclaimers, but particularly when it comes to companies like Facebook or Apple. Apple in particular says that they've had privacy at the center of as their core value, but this would seem to be an indication that they haven't quite woken up to the fact that users expect more privacy considerations and more data privacy when it comes to interacting with these devices.
Let's bring in now Bloomberg Technology's Matt Day to explain some of the security concerns that surround Amazon. Matt, what was interesting to me is that they gave the impression about privacy while not really actually getting it. Your take?
So Amazon, they were first out of the gate with smart speakers, and they realized that putting a microphone in people's homes was going to be a potentially controversial thing. So they engineered a couple of transparent measures they thought would give them kind of cover and trust from consumers. One of them is the spinning light on top of an Echo speaker, lets you know when the thing is recording. And the other was sort of the ability to go in and delete your audio recordings and view those through a web portal. And they leaned very hard on that kind of transparency. But at the same time, they weren't so upfront with the fact that they were sort of using user data as kind of a massive R&D lab to improve the service, right? To get new ideas for exactly what they were going to launch on Alexa and new features, and to sort of correct errors in the system as it stood.
And now I want to get to Facebook's latest. We are joined by Bloomberg Technology's Sarah Fryer. Sarah, what's interesting here is Facebook is a newer entrant into the market. Why the heck would they get into this market now?
Even after all of the controversy over these listening devices, Facebook still felt like it was very important to do the same with their data, their listening data, to try and improve it. And they really didn't think of it as very different from all the other things that they collect from their users. As you scroll Facebook, as you type, as you interact on the service, Facebook thinks that you understand that they are going to parse through everything you say and do and use it to make their systems smarter. The thing is, there's a difference between a machine doing that and human beings doing that. And especially with audio data, there's something so intimate about the way that this works behind the scenes. And if it was so natural and obvious to the companies, why did they feel it wasn't necessary to disclose it to consumers? of course consumers are alarmed.
Well, and Sarah, yeah, given everything else that's going on with the lack of trust in Facebook, any sense that customers are trusting Facebook with this device?
Well, they are purchasing it. There's a lot of compromises that we will make for our own convenience and entertainment. But I think that a lot of people are not aware about the network of contractors that are listening to this audio to do, as Matt explains, quality assurance testing and trying to improve the way the speech recognition works. And Facebook looks at this as an accessibility issue. They're trying to make sure that all different types of human voices can be recognized by their computers. The fact that they need humans to do this because the machines aren't ready yet, well, that just certainly wasn't part of the marketing.
And finally, I want to bring in Garrett DeVink, who covers Google for us. And Garrett, what's interesting, Google continues to use humans over some of the technology and some of the contractors instead of real employees. Does that help give them cover for all of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think Google is also using contractors, and I think that's a point that a couple of my colleagues have just raised. That I think for me, when I first started, learning about this, digging into the story, and reading the reporting of my colleagues and others, was that this was mostly being done by contractors. Right? These are not Google employees, not necessarily Amazon employees. In some cases they are, but mostly it's people who are employed by completely different companies, sometimes in countries very, very far away from the headquarters that these companies are based in and where they make their big decisions. And with Google, that really that sort of hit home earlier this summer when one contractor in the Netherlands walked out of one of his offices, taking with him a bunch of voice recordings, gave those over to some journalists who were able to listen to them and figure out who the actual humans were whose voices were being recorded, those consumers who weren't expecting that to be listened to. And sort of that started a bit of a scandal, and Google has said that they've actually paused human transcription of Google Assistant audio. But of course, they need to, transcribe these transcriptions with humans to continue to improve the service, to make sure that it can understand people with different languages, different accents, different speech impediments around the world, just like my colleagues have said. And so they'll surely start doing that again sometime soon to keep up with their competitors.
Garrett, should we start to get a sense that they would use more technology versus human review? And should that give us any comfort that not actual humans could be listening in?
I think all these companies wish that they could use technology to do review, but the reality is, and this is sort of the story when it comes to artificial intelligence all over the place, is that it's still not quite good enough. You still need humans to double check that these things are learning, that they're improving. And for the time being, we're going to need humans. It's the same way with Tesla cars. There's going to be accidents. We're going to need human drivers in some of those self-driving cars, until we get to that point sometime in the future, not sure when, that the machine can actually fully take over on its own.
That was Bloomberg Technologies' Austin Carr, Matt Day, Sarah Fryer, and Garrett DeVink. And an update on the T-Mobile Sprint $26.5 billion merger deal. It's currently being challenged by 13 states and the District of Columbia in a New York City courtroom. A Sprint executive says the wireless phone provider will not survive much longer without the T-Mobile takeover because it lacks the resources to upgrade its networks and has generally weak business prospects. Jay Bloom, he's the company's vice president of network development and engineering, testified that, quote, Sprint would not be viable within the next 2 years. The testimony rebuts claims by states that Sprint has a viable plan B. I spoke to Bloomberg Intelligence's Jennifer Rhee, who was in the courtroom on Monday.
I think that was the worst of the day for the companies in terms of this deal. Those were bad documents where Roger Soleil, the chief marketing officer, did suggest to other executives at Sprint that maybe what they could use as part of their negotiating tactic with T-Mobile to get a better price was that the deal would mean an increase of possibly $5 a month in average per subscriber, and that that T-Mobile wasn't taking that into account when they're evaluating what they would pay for Sprint. He did do a decent job in trying to play this down. It is a very damaging document in terms of the company's case. He said, look, this is just a hypothetical. I didn't do any real studies here. I was just guessing. And, hey, I'm just a marketing guy, and this is the way marketers think. And, in fact, he didn't really think that that was something that was used as part of the negotiation. But I would say that was probably the most damaging part of the trial today for the companies.
That was Bloomberg's Jennifer Rhee. Coming up, Peloton has seen its share slide in the past few days due to one of Wall Street's activist short sellers. We'll find out his reasons next. And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio. You can listen on the Bloomberg app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on Sirius XM. This is Bloomberg.
In San Francisco, a lot of tech action today.
Our top stories this morning in D.C. and
The Dow and the S&P.
Shall we? So the euro on a 7-day winning streak.
moves in the currency stock averages down 0.5%.
We begin in the oil patch. Saudi Arabia.
Brent crude pretty much unchanged.
Welcome to Bloomberg, the first word Asia.
The U.S. and Japan duke it out over exchange.
China's slumping onshore bond market is
Shares of Peloton taking another hit, falling close to 10% since Tuesday. And this time around, it's not due to a widely criticized holiday commercial. It's thanks to one of Wall Street's most active short sellers. Andrew Left of Citron Research put out a note saying that he sees, quote, clear flaws in the Peloton business model and predicts the stock will fall nearly 85% next year to $5 a share. I spoke to Citron's Andrew Left on the phone on Wednesday.
People have criticized that, saying, well, why don't we look at EBITDA per subscriber or customer acquisition cost? That's all very difficult because how they attribute some to hardware, some to software. But if you see a chart I put out, and it just shows how much the Wall Street is paying currently right now for every subscriber of Peloton. I compare it to Planet Fitness, to Match, Spotify, and you'll see right now the EV to subscriber is over $15,000 for Peloton. Versus, let's say, Match.com is $2,100.
Right. Well, and we're showing up that chart there, which, as you can see, on a per value per subscriber basis, it certainly does look overvalued, except I want to break down that ratio a little bit, because if you increase subscribers, the denominator goes up, the ratio falls, and that's pretty much what people are buying this company on. If they're a growth company, a growth stock, people aren't buying it on current subscribers. They're arguably buying on future subscribers. What do you say to that?
I mean, it's not like, fair enough, but this business has already taken the low-hanging fruit. So we know who bought the first 500,000 bikes. The real problem is who's going to buy the next 500,000 bikes. The treadmill that they introduced was pretty much a flop. They're behind the curve with all the rest of the equipment. You see all the mirror technology right now coming out from their competitors. They're not there. It's extremely competitive space. And most importantly, now with their digital offering, they're giving for $12.95. What other people, when you buy the bike, you have to pay $39.95. So you can, if you are value conscious, you could actually buy a bike for $700, let's say, and still enjoy the Peloton experience, the whole Peloton experience, and that's the Peloton Digital. And the CEO said some way that was their lead generation way of doing it. It seemed really sloppy. So you can enjoy Peloton and not have to pay over $2,000 for a bike.
Andrew, I wonder, are you short Peloton or short connected fitness as a whole here?
Oh, no, short Peloton. By the way, if Peloton, at $5 a share, if Peloton ends up to be $1.5 billion, $2 billion company, it's a major success. This is a spin bike, right? They didn't create the spin bike, and they didn't create streaming classes, none of that, right? And there's not a moat to any of that. So at a $2 billion company, it would be, hooray, huge. I don't know why Wall Street has to think this is a 9 or going to be a $10 billion company.
I do want to say that we have tried to repeatedly reach out to management and Peloton for requests for comment, and we have not heard back from them yet. Saying that, Andrew, would you buy Peloton if it were $5 a share? No. I mean, it's like saying right now, would you have bought Fitbit or buy GoPro? It's just dead money. The best days right now are in the rearview mirror. If it was $5 a share, I'd take that back. I would buy to cover some of my short. Okay. Well, speaking.
No, but by the way, this is not a knock on the product. I think it's a wonderful product. It's just not a $9-10 billion product. This is going to wind up as a $1.5 billion company.
You said to cover some of your shorts, making a joke, I know, but I want to come and take a look at a serious chart that I'm showing here inside my terminal for Bloomberg viewers. And Andrew, to describe it for you, you know the story. It is the share price versus the short interest, which is now 66%. It's one of the companies that have IPO'd this year over $1 billion that are being the most shorted. Do you feel that your short trade could be a little bit overcrowded here?
I mean, if it's crowded, it's crowded. If it bounces on short covering, you just sell more. You always have to be properly allocated when you're a short seller. But, I mean, the thesis is I would never own a stock because it's a crowded short. There's nothing that they can do to turn this business around. I actually made a joke. Unless they create a bike that works out for you, maybe that would change it. But other than that, they're not going to be a $9 to $10 billion spin bike company in a year from now.
So, Andrew, you've talked about the bike and the treadmill, and I want to get some of the fundamentals back into the conversation here. Analysts at Baird, KeyBank, Oppenheimer, JMP really highlighted that lower priced terminal that could come out into the future. If they do a lower priced treadmill and you hit a mass market, how does that impact your position, given you could see perhaps this company hit a critical mass?
Well, I mean, no doubt they're going to put out a lower price treadmill. They're going to do it either later this year or next year. They have not been direct about it because the more expensive one flopped. They have to because a treadmill is a much more popular piece of equipment than a bike. That's the only thing that's going to even keep this thing alive. Understand, for this stock to go from where it is right now, 30 to, let's say, 15, it doesn't have to fall off a cliff. It just shows decelerating growth. This is what you'll see. I was actually in a mall today, and the Peloton store was empty. It's not because people aren't buying Pelotons, but they've already picked that low-hanging fruit, and that has to be, this is not something for everyone. So, of course, they're going to put out a treadmill, and of course the treadmill is going to sell, but it's going to compete against all the other treadmills on the market. And similarly, I could also buy the Peloton digital experience for $12.95 with a $700 treadmill. And as consumers become more informed, it's going to be a battle for Peloton.
Does their announcement of introducing a rowing machine in 2020 change your thesis, given that's a new piece of hardware?
I mean, everyone has the rowing machine now. NordicTrack has the rowing machine. Their competition, Echelon, right behind them, has like 6 different SKUs. I don't know while Peloton was preparing for IPO, high-fiving, and introduced a $4,000 treadmill, their competition has completely, for digital home, health, and fitness, surpassed the offerings of Peloton. I think Tonal is Tonal, if you've seen that, super cool idea. Digital weights, unique, innovative, space saving, again with the mirror. These are all technologies that Peloton is not taking advantage of. But by the way, there's nothing to say. Again, very important. People hear 5 and they see 30, think stock prices, instead of thinking Peloton will end up $1.5 billion or $2 billion company. When you say it like that, it makes a lot more sense.
That was Andrew Left of Citron Research. And coming up, chipmaker Intel surprises the public by releasing information it could have kept secret. We'll find out what that is next. And later in the program, viral video app TikTok has canceled meetings with U.S. senators amid immense scrutiny over data privacy concerns. We'll find out why the company pulled the plug. This is Bloomberg. An unusual move for Intel. The chipmaker is the first to willingly disclose what is normally private data. It's pay inequality data. In a report on Tuesday, Intel released details about its pay disparity in 2017 and 2018. The company provided the data to the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and the results are not flattering. Bloomberg's Jeff Green in Detroit joined me to discuss on Tuesday.
Well, we probably didn't learn anything that was a big surprise by looking at the numbers. The big surprise, I guess, is that we could see the numbers at all. This is data that every company had to release as of September, but Intel may be the only one, at least so far, that's willing to share it with us. So we're getting to see sort of the macro information that feeds into what you would think of as median income at a company. It shows where women are in their jobs and where men are in their jobs. And like you said, it's not flattering, but it is, I guess, the first step to figuring out where the problems are.
Jeff, where are the biggest problems?
Well, I mean, kind of where you'd expect. White men and Asian men make most of the top paying jobs, and women are clustered in the lower paying jobs. It's a structural problem in society, and particularly in tech. And that's sort of what Intel is saying they want to bring to light, that the industry has a problem. They're willing to share theirs. Will you share yours?
Well, exactly here, Jeff. I mean, it was notable that Intel is openly sort of sharing more data than they need to. What is Intel trying to tell us about why they are doing this?
Yeah, I mean, they're admitting that this exposes them to vulnerability. They got beat up a bit today. When you show those charts, they don't look awesome. It's sort of, for some people, this is a revelation who haven't been paying attention to what's going on in society and with pay. So it's kind of a fresh attack. But their thought is that this only gets fixed if everybody's kind of pulling in the same direction. And they need pressure to be on everyone to kind of look at this structurally and maybe figure out what's wrong, and also on themselves. I mean, they put a part of their pay now for their top executives is fixing this. So there's kind of like some external pressure now for everyone to be able to look, employees included, and see how this sort of plays out.
But do you think this creates enough pressure where other tech companies would step in and do the same?
Well, not if some of the recent examples are any evidence. I mean, Citigroup did this with median pay, and there hasn't been a flood of banks, joining them. Uber just gave the report, last week saying, here's how many assaults we've had. It hasn't been like every other platform has said, oh, and here's our numbers. But I guess it starts somewhere. As you start to add these things up, potentially maybe a regulator or a change in government might weigh in, and people who kind of get ahead of this might have a way of, ability to shape it. So it's a loss leader kind of thing where you're taking a big risk out of the gate that may pay off in the future.
Jeff, it's notable that these results were 2017 and 2018. As you know, we're pretty much wrapping up 2019. Any indication that 2019 could have been a little bit better?
We'll never know. This data was collected under a program that was brought forth by the Obama administration, and the Trump administration has said we don't need to continue this. It's too hard on the companies. So this data, at least in this current form, is not going to be collected for 2019. I guess we'll have to see if there will be a new program or for companies will come up with something voluntary that kind of shows this. But that is sort of the sad part about this is this data is really interesting, and we may never get a chance to see it again.
Jeff, do they offer any potential solutions on how to be the first to at least try to fix the problem?
Yeah, one of the things they pointed out is that the industry is about 26% women, or that's what's available in tech. And so they made it a goal to have 26% of their employees be women, which they met last year. But their management, their top executives, are only 20% women. So they're saying, so one of the ways you change this ratio is by making 26% of the executives women, because that's going to push more women into these higher paying jobs. And then it's just math. What you really need is more women in higher paying jobs than they are in the lower paying jobs. And that's just been something that, particularly in tech, but in pretty much every industry, hasn't happened. I mean, the overall pay difference in the United States is women make 81 cents on the dollar compared to men. And this is just sort of being able to see it one person at a time.
Jeff, I'm not sure if you or anyone, frankly, can answer this point. I'm originally from New York, and we thought that it was a big problem in finance. We come to San Francisco, and we find out that tech is even worse. Why is tech the biggest sector that's struggling with this?
Well, I think it's, who do you get coming out of college who wants to go into these jobs? You get the graduates, but then they come into the industry. And from everything I've seen, the data that I look at, they don't stay. They look at it, they say, I can go somewhere else with this expertise, because everybody needs tech. They go somewhere else and they're treated better. I mean, you have to create an environment. And that's another thing Intel is really focusing on is they call it the warm line. If you can call if you think you need to leave, and you can talk to somebody, and they're collecting that data and trying to identify why are people wanting to leave? Why can't we keep these women?
That was Bloomberg's Jeff Green. Coming up, officials from TikTok were supposed to meet with senators pressing them over national security concerns. We'll get into why that meeting is no longer happening. That's next. And Bloomberg Technology is live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Technology, and be sure to follow our global breaking news network at Quick Take on Twitter. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to the best of Bloomberg Technology. I'm Taylor Riggs. Now to a continued look at the United States versus TikTok. The viral video app is under pressure from politicians who are worried about its data security and user privacy practices. And now executives from TikTok have canceled a number of scheduled meetings with U.S. senators that were set to take place in Washington this week. Bloomberg's Paul Allen and I sat down with our own Kurt Wagner on Tuesday.
We're told these are delayed and that they will be rescheduled in the new year, and that part of the issue is you may have heard there are some other things going on in Washington, D.C. these days with the potential impeachment of the U.S. president. And so as a result, I think that the feeling from the TikTok side was that there was just a lot going on right now. Probably not the best time maybe to be having these meetings. Of course, some of these senators are curious why they pulled the plug, but in theory, we should be hearing about these again in 2020.
So when those meetings do take place, what kinds of questions are the senators going to want answered?
I think all of the biggest questions right now have to do with user privacy and data storage, quite frankly. I mean, TikTok is owned by ByteDance, which is, of course, a massive Chinese technology company. And so there's a lot of concern around where is this information being stored? Is it stored here in the United States? Is it stored in mainland China? And really just talking to the company, I mean, this is still a relatively new app and new company to most of the United States, but especially most politicians. And so really just getting some basic questions answered around how the business works, what the data is collected, and where it's stored, I think is going to be the primary purpose of a lot of these discussions.
Kurt, it seems like we have had a few moments of what looked like progress, namely this week, a $1.1 million settlement resolving kids' privacy suit. Where is TikTok in terms of responding to some of the concerns?
Well, they have been very proactive about saying they want to have these discussions. I mean, the fact that they were going to be in D.C. this week was a signal that, they were willing to kind of answer some of these questions. Obviously, we will now wait to see if these meetings do indeed get rescheduled to confirm that they are seriously going to answer the questions. But I think that, this is a really popular app in the U.S. and things are going well for the app and for the company. And if they want that to continue, they realize that they have to kind of, play ball a little bit here. And so I would be surprised if they ultimately bail on these meetings. I think it's an important dialogue to be having right now.
In terms of that settlement from that case in Illinois, $1.1 million, that seems like small change, really, doesn't it? Was that a surprising verdict to the people who brought the action?
I don't know if it was necessarily surprising, but you're right. I mean, this is basically $1.1 million in the world of a technology company is pretty much nothing, right? This is a slap on the wrist. I mean, we were describing Facebook's $5 billion FTC privacy settlement earlier this year as a slap on the wrist. So when you think about $1 million, it doesn't really do much. But what I do think we're seeing is that this is a sign that a lot of these privacy issues are becoming, at the very least, top of mind for companies after many, many years where they weren't. And so even if it is a nominal amount, at least there is some kind of decision that is being made, and at least companies are being held to some extent accountable.
We've also spoken with other senators like Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee, who's come out and been a big critic and tried to help increase the age at which you can make in-app purchases to 18 from 13. Again, sort of seems like small progress, but in the bigger picture, how much is it really doing?
Yeah, and Senator Blackburn was actually one of the politicians who TikTok was supposed to meet with this week, and she tweeted yesterday that meeting obviously got canceled. So I think we also saw something similar, I believe it was last week, with Instagram actually requiring users to enter their age when they create an account, so that you can't create an account in theory if you're under 13 years old, which is what was always the rule, but was never really enforced, right? And so I think what we're seeing from this kind of pressure is these things do seem small, right? Is a 13-year-old who is going to create an Instagram account, are they really not going to create one now because they need to enter their birth date? Probably not. But at the very least, these companies are putting in safety measures that they should have had all along, and now they're being called out on it, and for the first time, in many cases, they're actually, following through.
Does any of this follow-through, Kurt, have to do with the fact that CFIUS, the US regulator, is also investigating? How's that proceeding?
It's hard to imagine that it's not a point of discussion here, right? So CFIUS is looking at the TikTok, the ByteDance acquisition of Musical.ly, which was an app here in the U.S., which has now been kind of merged with TikTok. And I'm told that there are conversations between the company and this regulatory body. And I think that you have to, if you are TikTok here, you have to be taking this very seriously. I mean, one thing that's unique is a lot of times I'm told these CFIUS arrangements happen while an acquisition is actually happening, going through the process, and so there's a little bit more that the regulators can do. You know, they can actually block something. This is an acquisition that happened 2 years ago. It is already well past the point of being able to block. So now it becomes a question of, well, what types of guardrails might they be able to put up? What types of stipulations might they be able to impose upon someone like TikTok? But again, I have to imagine that is certainly top of mind.
That was Bloomberg's Kurt Wagner. Coming up, Facebook will remain the top target of digital advertiser spending in 2020. That's according to Bloomberg Intelligence. So how much of the credit goes to Instagram? We'll discuss next. Plus, later in the program, the first cross-country commercial freight run in a self-driving truck. We'll hear from its co-founder. This is Bloomberg. Instagram's stories are now making significant contributions to Facebook. According to a report by Social Bakers, Instagram is drawing almost 10% of all ad spending on the company's properties at the end of the third quarter. The report also stated that advertiser spending on Instagram stories jumped almost 70% from the prior year. To discuss, we're joined by Eric Hagstrom of eMarketer on Tuesday, and also with us, Bloomberg Technology's Sarah Frier, who covers Facebook.
It really goes to show that advertisers are starting to catch on to this new user behavior because people increasingly are posting to these more ephemeral forums like stories where it's more casual, there's not as much pressure. And on stories, advertisers have been slow to catch on, and we've seen Facebook talk about that in their earnings calls, that we shouldn't expect advertisers to fully be participating in that format for a while now. And so this is a good sign for Facebook that their revenue is catching up.
Eric, in your opinion, how much of an increase is this prior to relative years?
Well, first off, stories only launched in 2016 on Instagram, and they've really just started monetizing them significantly in this year. So the growth is, relatively rapid. Instagram's growing at about 60% in 2019 alone, and it's going to account for about 20% of Facebook's worldwide revenues. And that's going to be even higher in the US specifically, at around 30%. Now, when you look at Instagram stories, most of the monetization is happening within the US. So it's growing very rapidly.
So, Sarah, to play off of that, if the stories are really monetizing well in the US, do we expect that then the next logical move would be to go overseas? And when do we start to see some of that monetization abroad?
I think you're going to see a lot more monetization from Instagram in general. The problem, though, on Instagram is that users are increasingly migrating to this ephemeral format and not posting as much on the main feed. Now, the main news feed and the main Instagram feed have ads that are much more expensive still for Facebook. So the overall advertising price on average has been depressed because of this shift to stories. Maybe once it becomes more natural for advertisers to do posts on stories, we'll see that improve over time.
Eric, is this a good sign, frankly, that as long as, I don't care if it's on the feed or the stories, as long as we're monetizing it and frankly the ad revenue is rising, is that really here what matters?
Well, there was a fear that stories for a while, given their lower price, their lower CPM, would cannibalize some spend from Instagram newsfeed, which takes a much higher price currently. That really hasn't happened, and people are, advertisers are just generally increasing their spend across the board, whether it's on, Instagram newsfeed, Instagram stories, or of course, the normal Facebook Blue app as well.
Eric, do these things actually work? I mean, I see ads, but are people clicking on them and buying products once they see the ads? Is it translating into actual dollars?
Well, first off, Facebook, Instagram, all those properties, they have great tools for advertisers to prove spend and prove ROI. So when you look at attribution, they really are ahead of the pack in a lot of ways. You can tie back if someone saw an ad on Instagram to whether or not they made a purchase on your store. Shoppable ads are even going to be more important for Instagram moving forward as well. And that's something that is even closer to the consumer as well. A lot of these ads on stories as well are more kind of brand building, so they're not necessarily trying to prove spend, but again, there are a ton of options and a ton of tools for direct response advertisers who really need to prove ROI and prove that their advertising is effective.
That was Eric Hagstrom of eMarketer and Bloomberg Technologies' Sarah Fryer. And a bad year for the global TV ad industry. TV ad sales fell almost 4% in 2019. And that's the steepest drop since the recession a decade ago, signaling that advertisers are following viewers to the internet. But there are some winners emerging from this market change. I spoke with Dallas Lawrence, an advisor at the marketing technology company Channel Factory, on Monday.
I think what we're seeing is just the maturation of television advertising, as it's now, the dollars are now finally following the consumer eyeballs as they migrate away from linear television to really streaming television. What we know today is that 6 out of 10 US adults stream, and they stream a lot. The average streamer watches twice as much streaming content as they do linear television content. And that doesn't even take into account the 42% of US adults that say they either are going to cut the cord or have already. If you just look at the holiday shopping season we're in right now, which is a marketer's target-rich environment, fully a third of consumers say they'll watch 0 live television during the holiday season. So the real challenge for marketers who still spend 95% of their TV budgets in these linear television channels is beginning to become very aware as those dollars are now moving to where the streamers are going. And there's going to be some winners and losers.
Dallas, that is a fascinating statistic to me. You are going to watch 0 ads of live TV, 0 hours of live TV this holiday season. Is that a new statistic?
It is. It's a new survey that came out from the Harris Poll researching consumers that said that fully a third will watch 0 live television. The races to watch that I think are really interesting. There are 3 ad races to watch here, I think, as we're trying to sum up who's going to be a winner here in the $75 billion ad race. You have the platform race, the content race, and the data race. On the platform side, I think clearly Roku is in the pole position to the #1 smart TV operating system in the world. Hundreds of apps utilize the Roku platform to reach consumers, and Roku sells those ads for those apps. Their advertising business is up 80% year over year. On the content side, you see a couple platforms like Hulu, which is owned by Disney, and Pluto TV, which is owned by Viacom, that have really leaned into the ad-supported model. A majority of consumers report preferring an ad-supported model versus kind of the Netflix subscription-based model, which is why you see Hulu, for example, 70% of their users are ad-supported. The last one, which I think is kind of the most interesting, gets the least amount of attention, and that's the data race that we're seeing unfold. Television advertising today is still largely bought and sold the way we've been doing it for 30 years, off of a few thousand set-top boxes on Nielsen, that are trying to extrapolate the behaviors of 300 million Americans across the most fragmented media environment we've ever seen. And marketers are saying that doesn't work. So you've begun seeing companies like Samba TV, for example. Samba TV is a company that has their software on most television manufacturers' devices. They're in 25 million televisions across the world. That's able to provide real-time data for marketers, breadth and depth that's never before been available, that's driving higher ROI for those marketers. So for no other reason, we're going to see ad dollars continue to migrate to streaming and to smart connected devices simply because they work better.
Dallas, I want to break down 3 of those that you just touched on, one of which is Roku. If you take a look at a chart that I'm showing here inside my terminal, it is the stock of Roku and then the average analyst price target. The trend is up, but frankly, it has been a volatile story as investors really try to figure out what streaming wars mean for Roku. Do you believe that you cannot launch a streaming platform unless you also do it with Roku?
I think Roku is the undoubted winner here in the streaming wars as we think about what happens in the next couple of months and what's already happened in the last few months. If you just look at Disney Plus, for example, Disney was seeing about 1 million downloads every single day of Disney Plus. During that same time frame, Roku downloads were up 50%. So people were actually going to get the Roku operating system so they could then access Disney Plus. So they are uniquely positioned in the ecosystem today to benefit from the $8 to $10 billion in content that's going to be spent, because you need to watch it on a platform. Disney doesn't have a platform that you can watch it on, neither does Netflix. So you're going to be going to your Roku device. If you've gone to a big box retailer, you've seen the Roku television. It's the #1 TV operating system in the world. You can buy a 55-inch smart 4K TV for $200. They're really in a great position in the market today.
You also talk about some of the winners from this, namely Hulu, which makes me wonder, is it a price or content? Do I like Hulu because it's $4, $5, $6 a month and not $15 a month? Or is it a content story?
Well, I think Hulu, what they've done well is they're having their cake and they're eating it too. They're offering the subscriber, they're offering the user either the subscription model that has no ads or the ad-based model. So the user's actually getting to pick and choose what they want. What we've seen from polling is that about 58% of US consumers prefer an ad-supported model that gets them somewhere around $5 or $6 a month, and about 40% prefer a subscription-based model. The challenge here, we didn't talk about the losers, but I think the real challenge here is going to be for Netflix. I've said on this program before that I absolutely believe Netflix is going to have to introduce an advertising-supported model. They've reached a saturation point in the United States with subscribers. They can't raise their price any higher with Disney undercutting them at less than half the price. So I think what Hulu's done very smartly is they've read the market, they understand there's an appetite for both, and they've offered both.
That was Dallas Lawrence of Channel Factory. And still ahead, 40,000 pounds of butter delivered cross-country in a self-driving truck. We'll learn how that happened. That's next. This is Bloomberg. Glassdoor's annual list of best places to work saw big tech names like Google and Facebook drop out of the top 10, while others rose to the top. DocuSign is one of those companies landing the number 3 spot. I sat down with CEO Dan Springer on Wednesday.
Well, I think our employees using Glassdoor as a great reference have spoken that there's a couple things we've gotten right. One is we've created an exciting vision, the DocuSign Agreement Cloud, to really go beyond that signature piece that most people know us for, to have a broader platform to build and be part of sort of the next big thing is one. Two is I think we, with our DocuSign Impact investment, have given people a reason to be proud of working at the company for our commitment to the community. DocuSign for Forests is the initiative we announced at the beginning of this year, with Jane Goodall at the World Economic Forum, to really try to be a positive role player in what's going on with global warming. And then the third piece is, because people love our product, employees feel really good about working at DocuSign because they hear what we call the DocuLove, the stories from customers all the time. Those are the things that I think really make people excited.
We just heard from Andrew Chamberlain that culture starts from the top. What's your number one piece of advice in terms of the culture you're setting, the tone that you're setting?
Well, I think there's two things. One, I'd say go to a company that's already fabulous, like DocuSign, that has a fantastic culture. It makes your job a lot easier as a leader, and I did that. But in terms of the small part I've played to try to improve the culture, I think it's about inclusiveness and listening. And we do a lot to really understand what our employees want to make this the best place they've ever worked, or to do the work of their lives, as we say, and then try to deliver on those components.
I want to talk about the fundamentals of your company. Namely, you went public in about April of 2018. It's been a while now, but I hear a lot of CEOs in the latest months come out and say, thank God I went public when I did, because the environment today is so difficult if you're trying to become a public company. You happy that you went public when you did?
Yeah, I think I actually have somewhat a contrarian view. I think companies should go public when they're ready and not try to time to the market, because you want to make sure you have the right maturity, put the right systems and controls in place. We happen to be fortunate that I do think we went out at a time that some of the challenges today, and we didn't have to give a lot of thought. Do we want a direct listing? Do we want to do a traditional IPO, which is now on all the minds of all the folks that are considering going public. But I do think for us it was a good time, and some of the choppiness over last year, we got that behind us now, and we're able to, I think, grow very well going forward.
DocuSign isn't profitable just yet. Do you get a lot of pressure from investors to be profitable?
Well, we are profitable on a non-GAAP basis, and we have been for the last 8 quarters.
At net income.
Net income, to your point, because of the stock charges, stock-based compensation charge. But I do think we get the investors now telling us growth is the number one imperative, and we're focused on doing that. I told you we're trying to build that DocuSign Agreement Cloud, the next big thing. We're going to focus on growth. But investors are saying they want responsible growth, and they want to see that path to profitability. And what we've shown them is with our high gross margin and the leverage we're getting in our business, that we're going to be a high growth, but also a profitable organization.
That was DocuSign CEO Dan Springer. A coast-to-coast holiday freight run with 40,000 pounds of butter. That's what Plus AI did with its autonomous truck. A provider of self-driving truck technology, Plus AI completed the industry's first commercial cross-country haul in just 3 days. To explain how it happened, we were joined by co-founder and chief operating officer Sean Kerrigan on Tuesday.
The vast majority was autonomous, so what we drove from California all the way to Pennsylvania. And so there are federal rules around rest breaks and so on in terms of crew shifts. So all of our trucks are staffed with both a safety driver as well as an operations specialist that rides co-pilot. And so we had to follow all the federal rules for that. But so aside from things like those crew changes and so on, or there were certain segments, like there was some road construction that the Pennsylvania DOT asked us to drive through in manual. Aside from that, it was mostly autonomous.
What are companies like Land O'Lakes, for example, telling you about the cost savings?
So I think people are really excited and interested in this technology. And so, as you know, there'll be some time before this technology is fully released as a product. But there will be tremendous benefits both in terms of safety and cost savings from this type of technology. And so that's what we were kind of setting out to demonstrate in this run. So operating basically around the clock for 3 days, going up through the Rockies and the Great Plains and across the country, demonstrating the overall reliability and safety and general maturity that this technology is achieving.
What's your relationship like with policymakers? You mentioned working with the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation. How do you ensure that you're working with them, but also getting responsible and perhaps federal regulation around this technology?
Yeah, so we try to be very proactive in terms of working with the different regulators. So earlier this year, we reached out to the state DOTs in all lower 48 states. We also just a couple of months ago announced a partnership with the Minnesota DOT around testing. And so we aim to be very proactive, and what we find is actually quite encouraging, that from a regulator standpoint, there's a lot of interest in supporting this technology, again, because of the safety. This technology has tremendous potential in terms of delivering safety benefits on the road.
Is safety the biggest question that you get from regulators?
I think there are a lot of questions, but safety is one of those, right? Which is, how do you demonstrate the safety of these systems? And so one way is doing runs like this, demonstrating that it works.
I spoke with Tess Hatch of Bessemer Venture Partners. She's at Stanford. She came from SpaceX, and she was walking me through the hype curve of autonomous driving. And she says that we are in the trough of disillusionment.
Okay.
This is going to take way longer than any of us really expected. On your timeline, where are we in reaching true autonomy, level 4, level 5?
Yes. So we're focused on level 4 autonomy for trucks. So the ability to go from distribution hub to highway, down the highway, into a distribution hub on the other side, fully autonomous with better safety and lower cost, more efficiency. We see the timeline for that is around 2023. Now that timeline is not just a function of when our technology is ready. It's also a function of when our partners are ready. And so that's why things like this run with Land O'Lakes are so important, because it's the timeline for when things like, say, the truck OEM platforms that we build on are ready for autonomous systems in terms of redundant systems for electrical and other components. The timeline for redundancy on like the safety critical truck components, so things like brakes and steering, you need redundant actuators in there. As well as the timeline on the regulation front that we talked about earlier, timeline for those regulations to fall in front. So as you look across all those, it's about 2023 is when we think it will line up.
That was Sean Kerrigan, Plus AI co-founder and chief operating officer. And that does it for this edition of the Best of Bloomberg Technology. We'll bring you all of the latest in tech throughout the week. Tune in each day at 5 p.m. New York, 2 p.m. in San Francisco. And Bloomberg Technology is live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Technology, and be sure to follow our global breaking news network at Quick Take on Twitter. This is Bloomberg.